something
So,
that you're
well,
saying.
yeah, you know,
Like you were
every
commenting,
day, every day.
Would you recommend it or no, it's too much?
No, for me, it was too much,
Okay.
you know, like, I can't tell you how many times we got off and on the bus. It's beautiful,
So,
but I would
I
have.
don't know, maybe she'll do it if it's nice weather.
Yeah, like stay in that area and just.
There's a
Yeah,
big
and
one.
then our luggage was lost, so we
No, I
did
haven't
luggage
known
for
those
3
things.
days.
Oh.
It was
Trip, trip from, you know what?
Yes, that's it settled down after that.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
jeez.
Yeah, but it was a lot, I'm glad I got to see it, it's, you know, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
God's earth is beautiful, but I want to
Yes.
see it a little slower pace. But, you know, I want to say, I did my birthday calls, she helped me with my birthday calls, and then I did peanut butter and jelly, but everybody else does such wonderful things, it's like, I'm not gonna say that.
Well, you should, you should say
It doesn't
Oh, I
matter.
did peanut butter and jelly, wow.
Sonia would say peanut butter and jelly, she does that. But we want everybody to say something, and
I know.
it doesn't matter, but that is an awesome thing to do, the peanut butter and jelly, you're helping so many people.
I know, but still, I
I
just
feel
felt
never
like.
embarrassed.
Yeah, and Pat helped me with my calls.
I did
my
one, I did
response.
one call.
Yeah.
So next week, say what you're gonna say today, next week.
Oh, okay, I
Yeah,
went
see,
to
we
that.
just have,
I'm trying to get everybody to say something, and
Right.
some people don't wanna speak
Yeah.
But
up,
you-
which is okay, but
You're supposed to report something,
Yeah.
even if it's just one
It's
thing.
just that,
Right.
like,
Maybe you did 5 or 6
I mean,
things.
you put it on the sheet, but we want
Oh,
Yeah,
verbally,
leggings with,
you
Yeah.
know, it's not to get the wow factor.
they do this really,
Oh,
I
gosh.
don't know if she told, you weren't in
no,
this.
so I can see.
Last week, we went on that
Oh, I
St.
love
Andrews
that.
bus trip to the
Oh, and you
wall.
can use that for football.
The Ark. Down in Kentucky,
Yeah.
and we went to the creation, it was all overnight, creation museum. And we learned a lot.
That was a lot of reading.
There's a lot of reading. But what at that creation museum, they also did give the other side of it, the evolution.
The Big Bang Theory.
What they thought,
They
and
both
then how,
went to Cincinnati, so.
The
Christian-
Yeah,
the Christian-
Cincinnati.
how it's based out of the gospel and all
So
that.
this is that family
Then we
album.
go the
Yeah.
next day to
They
the
post
Ark.
all these, oh my gosh.
I swear, I mean,
They
even if
post
you don't
You know
like
what, I
it,
get
you
Because I
you
think
go
that
in
in our
there and you see,
you
I've
imagine
never
spend that amount
seen
of
something
time
that
taking
big
photographs
that was
of it and-
man-made.
Yeah.
uploading them onto
It's
the,
like
your phone or to the
stadiums.
machine in the
It's
kitchen
like-
and
it's
Yeah.
say,
just that, you're like,
you know,
Well, I have
There've been
albums
like
in my
450
it's full of pictures
semi-trucks
of that.
inside.
I'm like,
That's
oh,
not-
now I look
And that doesn't
it's like
even get
5,000
any-
kids.
Yeah,
I
I
can't
see
find
it.
anything I'm looking
I could
for.
show
No,
you
I
that.
can't even.
so
Yeah.
then you go in and
More
there's
pictures.
four
That's what we need.
decks, but you only do the first three, and then the top one, and they had it
This
all.
gives you a little more perspective, like these are the people, and that's
That's
the.
just one part, that's the back stage.
Back,
That is
the
cool.
front, I forget.
So you go in this place, and they have, where the animals are, it was, they had like, what do you call those?
This is
Models.
the inside, looking up the middle, like, and everything's recreated like it would have been back then.
Yeah, so you got the animals making the noises, and they even had smells, like, so they weren't the animal.
Right.
But the one thing we were still amazed at,
Oh, wow,
yeah.
that is something.
Yeah.
It's huge, right?
So you go, what do you call the wax museum type of figures?
Well, you're talking about
The
the
people that talk,
the
and did
computer.
computer-driven,
Adapted.
they would have their, like Noah just said, they looked so real.
Now, yeah, but a lot of people.
Even though I
actually,
knew
when we're up
they
on the
were
gazebo,
fake,
the wind
I
just
still
was,
had to look.
we were like,
They had them with, you can
One of
see
those
like,
things where when you
the
got home,
veins,
the
just,
wrinkles,
just,
the wrinkles.
you know,
There weren't a lot of
Really?
there wasn't a
So I
lot.
take it a
And
read.
so you could try, if you had, there's like 6 different questions you could ask this person what he's talking. President,
And kind
and
of
this
mixed in the air.
person, fake person,
But it's
is
from
talking to
rainy
you
or cold
with the eye
winds all
movement,
the years.
nothing mechanical, it's just like free flowing, and their eyes, and you're looking, and I'm like, oh my God, I never saw anything like that before. But it was so amazing
But
what you look
we had
at.
such a nice
we learned a lot,
Dave or
and they have a zoo and all. I know, I mentioned the
Oh,
one
they
person
did.
that I
I
know
thought
from
maybe
another
they'll
group, and they said,
hang
oh,
around
yeah,
with
you went to
them,
that,
you know,
thing, you know,
maybe
because
in
it's,
summer.
sound like, well, you think it's probably sounds hokey, right? But she didn't say anything, she just said,
Well,
I said, if
what's
you're in that
this is
area, I would go,
afternoon,
I don't know if I
so
would directly like head
it's
out
not
there.
No.
afternoon.
being on the bus, we had three buses, and we left,
It doesn't start
early
till-
on Monday,
Okay,
and
I really,
we
it's
got
not
back
real long. It's
Tuesday
only-
night about
9.
9:30, 9 o'clock.
It's only
Oh, wow.
an hour.
But
That's
you-
a long day.
Oh, we stay overnight.
We
Oh,
stayed
okay.
overnight,
In the
we went out to
hotel.
eat,
Olive Garden.
Olive Garden, I mean,
It was well done.
it was well done, and you think back for how much it cost, but all the things you got for it,
Right.
it really wasn't.
Remember I had that one.
Yeah.
It was worth it.
Yeah.
But would I go again? Probably not. But I said, if you have any
One of the
inclination
women
of like, if
from
you're
one of the
Christian or
churches
something,
tripped down the,
you know, it was so
slid.
awe
It's on her shoe
inspiring.
on
I mean,
the
it
side
just,
of the-
it just-
But it
The
hit
way
her
it was
back.
built,
Oh,
the
no.
technology or the,
And then
They
finally
tried to
the
resent,
ambulance
they
came
tried to
out.
recreate it according
So we
to
had
the
to wait for the
measurements
ambulance to come.
that the Bible says.
And
okay.
take her away.
Wow.
And, you know,
Right.
and
And
they
then
just
all
got
the way
into
through
every
he's
phase of
He's talking to me.
creation
Do
and
you think you could just?
whatever. I mean, it was like your jaw dropped.
that was nice.
And then they had our gardens.
I'm just saying, though, you
They
gotta
had, we
worry
were
about
walking through these
stuff
gardens
like
on
that.
the outside. It was like, you thought you were in
Last day,
paradise.
Really?
Diane,
They had
wow,
all these
last year,
different
it was so windy.
vegetation and
The flowers
trees, all
everywhere.
different.
Right, one of the glass
So I took a
cases.
couple of pictures that I might, down the road, I might paint
So
because
then
it
I
was
was paying
such
it.
beautiful.
I
Anyway,
had her on around.
So, I mean, but
I
I,
didn't realize
Then I
it was
got
that
this
expensive.
I never heard of
Well,
it
there's a
before
lot of
till-
reading and.
yeah, there, yeah, like you wouldn't take a kid,
So that there was
to
no
that
glass
creation
on the
museum,
ground.
not to
And
the
then
art,
redirect.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
because
I would
it-
just go to the art myself.
I would just go to the art, even though we learned a lot about,
You know what I'm saying?
from the creation museum, but it was different, so,
That's
I'm
how
glad we
I
went,
look
and
at it.
I'm just glad we went on a bus, though, like you're thinking, man, that was like, maybe it worked out for you on that long trip, but it
Yeah.
was so nice.
Cause it's really
Took us right
three
to the-
churches, it's more
You know,
like,
if you had your own
we're
car,
only ancillary.
you had to be
than
shuttled
St. John and
to this
Chicago,
place, and it
Yeah.
was, there was a lot of walking,
St. John's
you said,
runs
just to go,
it.
we went in,
But
you
they're
saw how
very
big it
close
was,
to St. John's,
inside, you go
obviously,
back
so-
3 times,
Wow.
Where
And,
do you
it
park?
was beautiful,
Over
and
by
everything
the
was,
library.
I think it took 6
and then
years to
ancillary
build,
police
Oh,
and,
my goodness.
but
so
that's
yeah.
with, that's
Oh,
with
so go into the
technology,
National
and
Library.
back
Yeah.
in the old
Way
days,
up.
now,
I've heard about it, but I've never been part
Yeah.
of it.
so I'm just letting you know.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
see,
I
It's
may,
fun,
who
though.
knows, I may go, you
Yeah.
never know when
And then
I
you
But
probably
going
are.
on a bus though, if you're going overnight, because if you just park, if you go by on your own, I don't know, man,
So
I
instead of
just,
parking like by Mitchell.
I don't know,
you
I don't
park-
know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, we'll
that's up to
see.
you.
And the
I'm
dog.
glad
Right,
you're
right
back.
now, I'm bussed out.
Yeah, you're bust out, you don't wanna see a bus.
I'm bussed out right now.
I really want to do like her, I have a 3-week vacation.
You want to see if the office is still open?
Yeah,
Okay.
otherwise, they probably wonder if you would take it to the door or.
I don't know if Mary told you, we're leaving tomorrow morning, we're going to a state park for 3 nights in a cabin with my sister and her husband, her boyfriend. And,
Good night, you guys.
Bye, be careful.
Good night.
it's by Springfield, Ohio, it's called Buck Creek State Park.
Huh.
So we're leaving tomorrow and not getting back till Monday evening.
Well, I'm working all weekend because this is bachelor weekend for my soon-to-be son-in-law. So they're all at the
Oh.
bachelor party in Nashville. That means I'm watching the new baby over at her house.
Oh, okay, I see.
So her husband could go. Otherwise, she told her husband, you can't go unless my mom comes and stays with me, so
Yeah,
you know how that is.
Yeah,
right, but they're more important, so.
but, yeah, see, someone gave us
Have a good
$10.
weekend. Bye-bye.
They
I
didn't mention
never,
her name or
I
anything.
never heard of Buck Creek. Like, I've heard of
Well,
like Mohican.
Yeah, no, that's why we're trying, we want to go to different ones, the ones you never heard of. And, Springfield, so hold on.
noted, everything that you're seeing tonight is nationally representative data. So we engage panels of young people reflective of national representation of young people across all demographics. And specifically, we are focused on young people between the ages of 13 and 25 years old. That is our scope. So all of the data that we're looking at tonight will fall within that range. We are an applied sociological research institute. That means whereas we find theory interesting, ultimately the research that we conduct is intended to be actionable. It's intended to help people who care about young people care better in some ways. So our research is used across all various domains in education, school settings, youth mentorship settings, healthcare, etc. So I want you to keep that in mind. That's who we are. That's the work that we do, right? Sociological applied research. Now, as we think about tonight, and one of the reasons why I think your community is particularly unique is that oftentimes when we think about mind, body, and spirit, we think of these in a trifurcated way. We distinguish and separate these things, right? So we go to the gym for our body, and we go to a mental health provider for our mental well-being, for our mind, or we go to a faith community for spirit. But in reality, these things are one. It's integrated. So when we first set out to do the research on mental health, we had a lot of religious leaders, to our surprise, say, what does this have to do with the spiritual health, the spirituality, the religious life of young people? That shocked us, quite frankly. But this goes to the point of how we do this kind of trifurcation. We separate these things when in reality, they're inseparable. So if we take, for example, the practice of meditation, which is, we might, for some, meditation is a spiritual exercise. But we know from the neuroscientists and the research at the University of Wisconsin and many other places that meditation rewires the brain. It neurologically remaps the brain. So it is a spiritual exercise as well as a mental health exercise. And we know that meditation also has physiological effects. It reduces our blood pressure. It triggers multiple chemical reactions that physiologically change and affect our body as well. Or if we think about grief, grief is an emotional experience. Grief is a spiritual experience. And grief is a bodily experience. My own work with grief and meditation has taught me that the body actually knows before the mind knows. We carry these things in our body. So I can identify whenever I feel this heaviness like a vessel here in my chest. I know exactly what that is. Before it even becomes a mental effect on me, I can identify it in my body. So my point with all of this is simply to say that if there is a question of what does mental health have to do with the faith community, my response is everything. Because these elements of our life, these domains of our life, are not separate. They may be distinct from one another, but they are one and integral to our lives. So tonight we're going to look at, among other things, the epidemic of loneliness and isolation in the U.S., and in particular among young people. And we are fortunate to have the Assistant to the Surgeon General of the U.S. as part of our Research Advisory Board, and work closely with the Surgeon General's office. And I really appreciate what the Surgeon General, in a very recent publication from his office, has to say. That loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both individual and societal health. It is associated with greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and even greater than that associated with obesity and physical activity. And the harmful consequences of a society that lacks social connection can be felt in our schools, our workplaces, civic organizations, and so on. So this integration of mind, body, spirit, they're inseparable. They're inseparable. So what I'd like to do in our time together is give you a snapshot of the well-being and identity of Gen Z. We're going to do a quick profile of Gen Z, the demographic of this generation, a bit of a look at their religious and spiritual lives, and then a little bit more exploration around this epidemic of loneliness. When we talk about Gen Z, we're talking about young people who were born between 1997 and 2012, or young people who are 11 to 26 years of age currently. And generations are defined in a very interesting way. We won't get into that, but there's some fluidity and overlap. So actually 11-year-olds, some would say, social scientists would say, they're the front edge of the next generation, which is being referred to as Gen Alpha. But that's for the geeks to argue about. It doesn't matter. The fact is that we're here talking tonight about young people between 11 and 26 years of age. And that is the direct range of our research itself. So the first thing is to recognize that Gen Z is the most diverse generation in modern US history. And when we look over the last 10 years by race, we see that the white population, under 18 years of age, white population is declining, and the BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous, people of color population is increasing. So more young people in Gen Z, increasingly people of color, and fewer white. If we take a little wider out view, 20-year picture from 1990 to 2020, we see a similar pattern. So the coloring of this generation. So racially, this generation is highly diverse. They're also highly educated. So this is a generation who has higher education than any previous generation. Among Gen Zs who are of college years, 57% of them are enrolled in college, and 44% of their parents have a bachelor's degree or higher. So racially diverse, highly educated. We also see that Gen Z lives by high clarity around their values. So this is a generation that is clear around things that they hold to be of value to them. It's not a valueless generation. But what we see is a tremendous values gap. So specifically, when we look at Gen Z relative to religious institutions, their perception of religious institutions, we see these huge gaps. The top bar there, the light green, is what Gen Z cares about, the degree to which they hold that issue as a value. And the dark green bar below is the degree to which they believe their religious institutions, and again, keep in mind that our data is reflective of young people nationally. This isn't just Catholic data. This young people of all or no religious affiliation at all. The degree to which they perceive religious institutions care about these things. Now, in 2016, we did a special project on the disaffiliation of young Catholics in America. And we looked specifically at why young people who once identified as being Catholic are no longer Catholic. And the number one reason that was identified in that research was around LGBTQA rights. For Gen Z, largely, and this is a generalization, this isn't true of all in the population, but largely, for Gen Z, LGBTQ rights is a non-starter. That is, a community that is not welcoming and accepting of that value for them is simply a community that they won't associate with or affiliate with. So we see these huge values gaps. The things that are very important to this generation, they perceive as far less important by the religious institutions that they are aware of. So it's a generation where authenticity is among the highest values that they hold. Authenticity. And if you look at the upper right-hand corner, nearly 40% of young people say they will only join an organization if it values inclusion among its highest priorities. So this is a little bit of a sense of who this generation is. Again, I'm giving a very broad snapshot. I want to look at the religious and spiritual expression of Gen Z, because this is where I think the quote that Dobie attributed to me at the start, which I don't remember saying, but I think it sounds right, is one of those assumptions that where things get really clarified, but also muddy at the same time. So there's so much talk about the disaffiliation of young people from religious institutions, right? I mean, you look around your own parish community, I suspect you are not dissimilar from the national norms on this. Fewer and fewer young people fill your pews on any given Sunday, I suspect. And so we make the assumption that because young people are not engaged with traditional religious institutions, that they are uninterested in religious and spiritual matters. But what we see repeatedly, year over year, since we've been tracking this starting in 1999, is that 71% of young people say they are religious. And 78% of young people say they are spiritual. Interesting. Well, let me muddy the waters for you a little bit. Yet fewer young people identify with a religious tradition. I'm religious, yes. I'm spiritual, yes. But fewer and fewer identify with a religious tradition. So if you look at just Christian, nothing in particular, agnostic and atheist, 39% of young people in the US would identify this way. And yet, at the same time, they would say, I'm religious and I'm spiritual. I'll further complicate it for you. Identifying with a particular religion does not equal engagement with that tradition. So 60% of young people would say that they are not a member of a religious institution. So I might say I'm Catholic, but I'm not a member. But the thing that I want you to see on this slide here is what I have the red arrow pointing to, and that's 20%, 26%. 26% of young people in the US today have never been connected to a religious or spiritual community. This is, I don't have the trend data for you here, but if we looked at this trend over the last even 10 years, this is a huge increase. So increasingly, more and more young people will have never been associated with a religious or spiritual tradition to begin with. So, 2016, when we did our work on disaffiliation from religion, these are people who leave religion. Today, if we were conducting that research, it would be on non-affiliation. So increasingly, and what we anticipate we will see in the US is an increasing movement in this direction, where future generations will increasingly have never been connected to a religious tradition in the first place. Or in other words, if you want to go and study religion in Australia or religion in Europe, you'll see what our future likely holds in this regard. I'm delighted that tomorrow I'll be able to be with our Catholic school, your Catholic school community here, because one of the things that I would say about that is that our Catholic school system in the US, much like in Australia, will increasingly be the only touch point many young people have with a religious tradition. Yeah. So in Australia, for example, where we've done a lot of work and have a sister research institute there, there's no such thing as parish religious education in Australia. There's barely a such thing as a parish in Australia. But they have a huge Catholic school system. And that is increasingly the only place in which young people, and it's something like 80% of the students in their school are not Catholic, don't identify as Catholic. So your school system here is a tremendous blessing and gift to this community and to young people. Not surprisingly, very few young people attend religious services in a given year, or attend once. I love this second one. Attend, but only once per year or less. What is less than once a year? They walk out halfway through? I don't know. But anyway. So we asked young people why they don't attend religious services. And among their answers, I find this one particularly poignant. More than half of young people, 55%, say they do not attend religious or spiritual services because they do not feel free to be who they are at those kinds of gatherings. That who I am is not welcomed here. Who I am, I must hide a part of myself in being here. Again, I take you back to that values gap, etc. So think about the question that I asked you at the start of think about a place where you feel a deep sense of belonging. 55% of young people who don't attend religious services say they don't do so because I don't feel as if I belong here. When it comes to belief in God or a higher power, we ask that question of young people in very broad terms, again, because we're doing nationally representative data. 49% say they believe in God or a higher power or believe more than they doubt, which means 51% of young people wrestle with that question or doubt. This is not, surprisingly, all that different than the generations sitting in this room and their parents' generation. Gallup has some really staggering data on this point that shows that even among Catholics, I can't remember the statistics, so I'm not going to attempt to say it. I'll look it up and let Dobie know. But that we see these really interesting phenomena. I identify as Catholic. I attend Catholic Mass, and yet I might not even believe in God. Or not sure if I believe in God. I mean, it's just really the shifts that are at play here socially as a society are quite interesting, and I'm not sure what all to make of all of it actually, because at times it feels very convoluted and like, what? Huh? What? How do you piece all this together? So when we talk to young people about the extent to which they feel connected to these things, a higher power, humanity, and the natural environment, we see that their greatest sense of connection is to the natural environment. I've always joked that if you started a new religious community that was in nature and people could bring their dogs, you'd probably have the largest religious community. Oh, throw in some yoga and, some meditation and a wine club. Not for this generation, for us. You probably have the largest community. We hear over and over young people say to us, we ask them, where do you feel the greatest sense of belonging? This isn't a plug for this organization, but over and over, CrossFit. Are you familiar with CrossFit? This thing called CrossFit? It's a gym where you do high intensity workouts for 45 minutes and you go home crying because you hurt so bad. But over and over, this rises to the top as the most meaningful community in their lives. So 3 years ago, I decided I had to figure out what are they talking about? Because we would go around the country presenting this data, and I would hold up CrossFit as an exemplar of a community in which young people are finding a tremendous sense of community, and many referring to it as their church. So I went to our local CrossFit gym, and I said, I'm a social researcher. I've never belonged to a gym in my life. I want to sign up for a 3-month trial so that I can see for myself what this is, and in 3 months, I'm out of here, I'll have collected my data, and thank you very much. That was 3.5 years ago. Guess who is still a member of the CrossFit gym? John, the introvert who can't stand being around other people. Not you, but you know what I'm saying. here I am, still a member of this community. I'm going to talk a little bit about why later when we talk about isolation, social isolation and loneliness. But I'll give you the first piece. I can't get more than 5 feet inside the door of that gym. I go 5 times a week, 5 workouts a week. Yeah, it's awful. But why do I keep going back? Because I can't get more than 5 feet inside that door before I hear my name. Hi, John. What? Somebody sees me? Well, hi. I'm coming back tomorrow so I can hear my name. Right? So, what we see with young people with respect to their religious identity and so on is this. And tonight's presentation isn't the main topic, but I wanted to give you a sense of this, that increasingly what we see is the locus of religious identity has moved from, for many of us in this room, our generation, my generation, I'm 63 years old, it would have never occurred to me that my religious identity could be anything outside the confines of this space. I was born and raised Catholic. I was Catholic, that's what I am. I remember as a junior in high school going to my mom saying, I'm not sure I want to be Catholic. You can imagine how that went over, you know. But my mother, God bless her, said, well, what do you think you want to be? Go explore. And so she let me go to the Lutheran church and the Baha'i temple and things like this until I came back and go, I don't know, I guess being Catholic's not so bad. I'll stick with it. But the locus of our religious identity was in a singular institutional identity. Today, young people, welcome to the free world, in particular capitalist societies, we see this across the free world, especially capitalist societies, is individualism. And what individualism has led to is that we can now construct our own identity. And with respect to religious and spiritual identity, that's what we see happening. Young people say, I'm religious, I'm spiritual, I'm not associated with a tradition or any one particular tradition. Instead, younger generations are constructing their religious and spiritual identity from a multitude of things and pieces. They're constructing it and piecing it together. And we happen to live in a society where that is tolerable. Not only tolerable, but building and constructing ourselves in this world is part of our social fabric. So this is what we see. But let me flip to the main topic of our night. And that is this. That Gen Z, and feel free to take pictures of these slides. I meant to say that as I was going along. You can take pictures of any of these slides. Father Bob mentioned this, that Gen Z is in the middle of the biggest mental health crisis we've seen among any generation, and specifically what I'm going to focus on with our data tonight is the epidemic of loneliness. Here's the definition of loneliness that we use as social researchers. It is that persistent state of being in which a person feels isolated, unsupported, and without close friends. Loneliness. Absorb this for a moment. 61% of young people agree that the adults in my life don't truly know how much I am struggling with my mental health. 45% of young people say they are moderately or extremely lonely. 55% say they are moderately or extremely anxious. 57% moderately or extremely stressed. And 47% moderately or extremely depressed. These are staggering numbers. Megan says this: nobody cares. Nobody is really listening. Now we know that's not true, simply by the fact that you are in this room tonight. There are people who care deeply. But Megan's perception is the opposite. How do we change that? This, I think, of all of our research data slides, is one of the most important pieces of data we have. I'll just let you absorb this for a second. We're looking at the relationship between the number of trusted adults in a young person's life and their reported rates of loneliness, feeling understood, feeling left out, and feeling stressed. Statistically, the differences here are enormous. This was a data point that we did not expect to find in our research, but when it came to the fore, we knew it was something very critical to understand. That as we increase the number of trusted adults in a young person's life increases, their rates of loneliness, isolation, anxiety, and depression exponentially decrease. And I don't have the slide with me, but it's something around 1/3 of young people say they have no trusted adult in their life. That's their perception. And their perception is their reality. 1/3 of young people would say, perceive they have no trusted adults in their life. So at the beginning, when I asked you to think about who are the people you could turn to in your time of greatest need, 1/3 of young people would say, I have no one. This is Alex, 22. The reason I stayed at my church is because of my mentor. She's very hospitable, very loving, very forgiving, non-judgmental. In other words, I stay because I feel like I belong. I stay because somebody sees me. I stay because somebody accepts me for who I am. I don't need to hide who I am. I don't need to hide my identity in this place. I kept a couple of the slides in that we'll see tomorrow among the school folks, but I think this is interesting. You know, we see the highest rates of non-flourishing among high school students, followed by college and middle school. These aren't hugely different rates, but certainly at high school levels is where we're seeing some peaks of young people reporting a sense of non-flourishing. Flourishing is the term that we use in social science. It simply means a person's perception of their well-being. Perception. 1 in 3 of our young people feel completely alone much of the time. And nearly 40% believe they have no one to talk to and feel left out. Again, staggering numbers. And nearly 40% of young people feel at times as if no one knows them. Specifically, when we ask young people about their sense of belonging at school, we see this. 36% of young people report that they feel lonely at school often or most of the time. 36%. When we break that down by gender, not surprisingly, non-binary young people have the highest levels of reporting loneliness, females slightly higher than males. By race, white young people report the highest levels of belonging, and young people of color report lower rates. Black young people reporting the lowest rates of belonging in school. And then when we look at young people in terms of those who attend a religiously affiliated school and those who attend a non-religious affiliated, we see a substantial difference that young people attending a religiously affiliated school report much higher rates of belonging than those in non-religious affiliated. And again, we see a correlation between those who are flourishing in their mental health or report that they're flourishing in their mental health and those who believe they have a sense of belonging in their school. And this, I think, will be particularly interesting tomorrow morning with our school faculty. When we looked at the difference between young people who have a meaningful interaction with their teachers and those who don't, we see this huge discrepancy. The question is, or the statement to the young people is, I feel lonely at school most of the times and do not want to be there most days. Of young people who say that's true, 13% had a meaningful interaction with a teacher or professor, and 87% did not. So in other words, this presence of caring, trusted adults, that's what this data slide is getting at. The critical importance, and that those relationships are of a particular nature. So again, looking back at that data point, as the number of trusted adults in a young person's life increases, their reported feelings of loneliness, social isolation, anxiety significantly decreases. This is trusted adults in their lives. Yeah, not friends. Yeah. Now, to your question, when we ask them about, well, this is, again, on adults I have in my life that I could turn to in a time of need, parents and guardians come up as at the top. But look at down towards the bottom where I have those arrows. Teachers are only 17% and religious 8%. I'm trying to stay in my social science scientist lane right now, but as a pastoral theologian as well, I would say that for a faith community to see this data point is an alarm ought to set off some alarm bells. Why do young people not see their religious leaders, their religious community, as a place they can turn to in a time of need? And I think the things that you are doing here in this parish have the potential to turn this tide. So let me just move to this then. That belonging, we know as social scientists, we've known this for a long time, that belonging precedes believing. Belonging precedes believing. That is, if I don't perceive that I belong here, I am unlikely to engage with your belief system. The greatest need among young people today in this loneliness epidemic is to create communities of belonging, a place of feeling deep connection. And what we have seen in our data is that this can be done. We can build a community of belonging, and it is not complex. It is not to say that it is easy, but it is not complex. And what we've identified through our interviews with young people and analyzing our qualitative data since 1999 is what we call the belongingness process. And it has three movements, and we're not going to go into it tonight in detail. I'm going to put up on the screen a resource that you can go to and explore this in much more detail if you'd like. But we have identified three movements that help a person move from a sense of not sure if I belong here to a deep sense of belonging. And I say it's not complex, but it's not easy because it requires great investment of time. It requires investment of attention and intention, and it requires great vulnerability on the part of the community. So we talk about the noticed, named, known process. And I'm going to go back to my CrossFit example in my own experience to illustrate it. The first is that I'm noticed. A huge part of loneliness is I believe that I am not seen, that I don't matter to anyone. When I walk through the door, when anyone in our gym walks through the door, they can't get more than 5 to 10 feet without being noticed. The coaching staff is trained to keep their eye on the door. They're running class. They got a class going on. They got loud music going on, but they're constantly observing what's happening in the room. And they're trained. This is intentional. Now, you have to understand, our gym was founded by a psychiatric nurse at the Mayo Clinic. He saw this great need for belonging. And when I interviewed him, he said, I'm not in the fitness business, I'm in the belonging business. I started this gym to create a place where people can feel like they belong and have a community where they are known by name and seen and welcome no matter their identity. That's what he set out to do. It sounds similar to what Jesus set out to do. So why is CrossFit doing this so successfully? So they watch the door. They notice. They see, come in. Very first thing, called by name. John. I probably can't get 30 feet inside the door without hearing my name 3 or 4 times. In the 45 minutes that I'm there, I will hear my name at least 3 times. We know from the psychological research data what that does. It triggers chemical response in the brain, releases dopamine in the brain. It elevates my spirit just by hearing my name. Now think about this. There are 30-some people in this class, and every single person hears their name 3 times in a 45-minute period. I'm noticed. I am named. And then there's the observation. Paying attention. Hey, John, it might be something very mundane. John, looks like you got a new haircut. That's all it takes for me to go, huh, what? That's right. See? That's exactly what the experience is. So, this named, noticed, making an observation, I see this. I saw that you, got a touchdown last night. I see that, whatever it is, observing, paying attention, and then naming what you see for the young person. And then the movement to known. And this is where it typically breaks down. So many young people report that they might feel noticed, they might feel named, but do they feel known? And that movement into known is that movement into a space where you have become so curious about me. You're asking me questions of curiosity. Tell me more about you. You're not talking about yourself. I want to know about you. Tell me about you. What matters to you? What are you struggling with? What are you thinking? How are you feeling today? And then the known is that in this space, no matter what that is, it's okay to be here with it. No matter what you're struggling with, no matter what you're thinking, no matter the differences we might hold, even in those value gaps that we saw, for young people who believe, even though we perceive there's a gap in our values, if I believe that I can be here, that I am welcomed here, despite our difference on that, I will stay. So, in our gym, for example, in the known, there's curiosity every time. Hey, what's going on? What's new? What'd you do? Hey, yeah. And then it's genuine, authentic listening. Affirmation. That's one. I didn't realize this at first, but we have no mirrors in our gym. No mirrors. Why is that? Because mirrors cause judgment. When we look in the mirror, we see what we don't want to see about ourselves. Right? So intentionally, there are no mirrors in the gym to create a greater sense of belonging, to rid the environment of the possibility of that negative judgment. Fascinating. So, 81% of young people say that they feel listened to when people seem genuinely curious about what they have to say. And 73 listen to when people ask questions about what they've said. Religious institutions are very good at telling and not always so great at listening. Tell me about you. What brings you here today? Tell me your story. And then listening and accepting without judgment. So belonging relationships have these kinds of qualities. And so when we are talking about increasing the number of trusted adults in a young person's life, we're talking about the need for adults that they perceive and experiences of having these qualities. This is a Surgeon General, again. He said, Each of us can start now in our own lives by strengthening our connections and relationships. Our individual relationships are an untapped resource, a source of healing hiding in plain sight. Answer that phone call from a friend. Make time to share a meal. Listen without distraction of your phone, etc. Express yourself authentically. The keys to human connection are simple but extraordinarily powerful. And I would say the same is true with respect to the loneliness epidemic among young people. I particularly love this quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And he says this: "The community is that place where I am known by name and missed when I am gone." Think about the young people in your community. Do you know them by name? Would they feel as if they were missed when they are gone? 5 actions that we can take to positively impact the lives of Gen Z. First is to intentionally focus on building and deepening belonging. Belonging is the antidote to the loneliness epidemic. Second, we must find ways to increase the number of trusted adults in a young person's life. Trusted adults of the kinds of qualities that I pointed to in the previous slides, whether this through mentorship, programs, or other means. We often think, perhaps, that young people don't need or want adult relationships in their life, but this is the opposite of what is, in fact, true. Third, we need to create spaces where young people feel safe to explore and discover their yearnings and their curiosities. We need to create spaces where they can be their authentic selves without having to hide any part of their identity to be here in this space. Fourth, invest in the mental health of young people as a pastoral framework. Continue to invest in that mental health work here. There is no greater and more important work for young people today than what you have started here already. And we didn't go into this in data, but among BIPOC young people of color, which increasingly the US population will be BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous People of Color. That's what that stands for. We have a whole report on navigating injustice and the relationship between racial and ethnic identity and mental health. It's a very important study, but young people of color do not leave their race and ethnicity at the door, and it is a huge dimension of whether or not they feel welcomed in a particular space. So let me conclude. If you want to scan this QR code, it'll take you to a number of our research reports that break all of this data open in much greater detail. This is the report on belonging, which goes into the belongingness process in great detail and very practical steps to do that. I'll let you snap a photo of that, or are you able to get that? And I can put it back on the slide at the end. That one's the same. And then this one here will take you to a page where you can sign up for Springtide's newsletter and be on our mailing list if that's something you'd like to get regular updates on our research. So with that, I thank you for this time this evening, for allowing us to share these data points with you. I thank you on behalf of our entire Springtide team and on behalf of Dr. Tricia Bruce, who is our new executive director, recently joining us as the head of Springtide. Again, I'll leave you with that quote from Jonathan Sachs. Community is that place where I am known by name and missed if I am gone. And I thank you for what you are doing here in this community to build that kind of community for young people. Thank you.
Thank you. So, this is your opportunity to ask John any questions. And I have the traveling mic, so I will either come and give you the mic or you ask and I will repeat it so we can all hear. But as you listen to that, what's stirred? What questions come to mind that you'd like to ask John? And whoever goes first gets that trip to Hawaii. Checks in the mail.
In my generation, in my family, and in most of my friends, there were multiple children. Lives.
I'll use the microphone in a second. Good.
It seems like the younger generation, they don't really do a lot of onlys, single kids in a family of one or two. Does this data reflect how many of these children were only children or only one sibling versus?
Okay, so the question is there any connection to the data related to family size? Many of us I came from a family of 9, like, remember the days when a family of 8 or 9 was big versus 2 or 3 is big? And just the point of, and yet many families now may have one child, and not judging, but you're saying, is there a connection there? Trusted sibling and somebody to torment and be tormented by. John, anything related to this, to family size or, having that family member as a sibling that met some of those relationship needs?
There was that data point in terms of siblings that, I turned it off. Let me see if I can get back to that. So siblings, in terms of adults I have in my life that I could turn to if I need, in a time of need, siblings were the third on that list, right? But we do not, as part of our demographic data, we don't collect data on family size, so I couldn't give you any correlations.
I'd be curious because when you asked earlier, who's your trusted friend, immediately my sister came to mind.
Sure.
If I'm an only child, that's not a possibility. So I was curious.
Right, and again, that would be so when you do sociological research, it always gives you new things to do more sociological research. But yes, great question, thank you. Somebody else, as you listen to this and kind of ponder it, what is coming to mind, please? Okay, so did you hear that? It would be the idea that a higher level percentage-wise of people going to college, getting a college education, and how much of this experience is related to what they're learning in that experience. Is that accurate?
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't speak to that specifically. We don't collect any, haven't tracked that kind of data, but I think, what your question points to is the social factors that influence and shape a generation.
Yes, because many of us send our kids to good schools. I mean, they have Catholic education.
Sure.
Adult high school, then we send them to college, and then suddenly their mindset is completely changed.
Sure, so yeah, welcome to education, which does that. It shapes and reshapes our minds. So, and that's nothing new. So, yeah, so, but keep in mind that the data reflects 13 to 25-year-olds. So, yeah. Yeah, the social factors that impact generations and patterns of behavior, identity, practice are complex. So I think a particularly helpful person around this is a gentleman named Charles Taylor. He's actually a Catholic philosopher in Canada, contemporary Catholic philosopher, who has done extensive writing around secularization. And I hesitate to use that term sometimes because it conjures up a lot of connotations that may or may not be accurate. But his point is these social shifts that we are seeing today, that I'm describing for you here today, particularly with respect to that in the free Western world and largely in capitalist societies where we can construct our identity, like it or not, we can construct our identity. And I can be this today and that tomorrow. Now, I'm not putting any judgment frame around that. I'm just saying that that's a reality of our social fabric. But Charles Taylor, in his work on secularization, talks about how these social shifts that we're seeing dramatically play out in front of us today have been at work over the last 500 years. And education has a significant role in that. The advancement of science plays a significant role in that. So it's not that faith and science can't coexist, they do, and many scientists are also people of faith. It's not that, it's simply to say that modern science is demystifying the world. And that demystification plays a role then in the importance of religious institutions, traditional religions, which have been rooted in, and their fundamental sacred stories are rooted in mystery. So as these things that are mysterious are no longer mysterious and can be explained by science, it begins to reshape the social structure. So I think it becomes a very complex, they're multifaceted thing, but what we're seeing today, the mistake we want to avoid is to point to any one thing. So, for example, a real common one is, well, it's social media. If we didn't have social media, this wouldn't be happening. No, it still would be happening. It might be playing out a little differently, but so what we see is this shift that has been happening over 500 years, Taylor would say, education playing a role in that, and ironically, the Catholic Church has been one of the great advancers of education in the world. But it's complex and there's multiple social factors.
Thank you, John. And I think one of the, if I could just add a small layer to that, is what good social scientists are careful about, and I hear you being careful, is we can point something out, but that to make the jump to say causation, it's happening because when there are how many factors, how many complexities, we wish, right? Don't we all yearn for that simple, clear answer? Good luck. And I don't mean to discourage you, but that's what's so hard about this. Did you have a question? Okay, so the question is related to how does the current data that John is presenting relate to Generation Z, relate to similar data of earlier generations? Is that accurate?
Yeah, so we collect data only 13 to 25-year-olds, so we stay in that lane. We don't collect data outside that. But I would point you to Gallup and Pew for the religious affiliation data of prior generations. But keep in mind that Gen Z is a generation being raised by a generation, their parents' generation was the first generation to en masse begin to disaffiliate from religious institutions in America. So it's not, we're not surprised at all by the trends that we're seeing, particularly that rapid rise in just one generation of young people who have never been affiliated with a religious institution in the first place. Now, since I'm speaking to a faith community, I'll say this about that. We can look at that and go, oh my gosh, that's horrible, right? And like, oh, well. But you could also look at it and go, but wait a second. These young people are also telling us that they're deeply interested in the religious and spiritual dimension of life. And a large percent of them have never heard our story. So in some ways, it's a fertile ground for inviting them into hearing a story that they are not yet familiar with. And I'm going to give you one example. I meant to share this, but it's a really good one. They're now kind of nationally organized, but it started at grassroots level in a religious community of women in just outside of Los Angeles or San Francisco. I can't remember. It's called Nuns and Nuns. N-O-N-E-S, nuns, meaning young people of no religious identity, and nuns, N-U-N-S, religious women. And it started as one little community in a religious order house where these sisters invited in young adults in the community who were religiously and spiritually exploring, had no connection to the Catholic tradition at all, and they just came together for a couple hours a week to talk about things that mattered to them. That belonging process that I described, they came together, tell me about what you're thinking, what are you exploring? And then they began to listen to the story of the sisters. And it has become now nationally organized. Religious orders of women across the U.S. are starting these small communities in their local place of inviting young adults who are exploring, who have never been affiliated with a religious tradition. And we met with them, and this young man who was born and raised Jewish has now dedicated his life. He's living in the religious community with the sisters, exploring his own calling to religious life. So it's really interesting. So we can look at that and go, oh, that's terrible. We can also look at it and go, wait, they are religiously and spiritually curious and longing and looking. We have something in our tradition that may fill what they're seeking. So it's also a tremendous opportunity.
Right, and in that idea of relationship, welcoming, and making the connection, there are 100 reasons why we don't want to call that group of young adults the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. How would you like to be defined by what you are not?
Yeah.
And I know you're aware of that too.
Yeah, we're aware.
And of course, our amazing nuns, what did they do? We could go to the bank on that, right? And they did. I want to introduce you to a few specific things, and I'm going to invite Father Bob to make a couple closing comments. In the resources in the back, I want to cover some very specific things. There is a small orange page that just asks you to turn this in, your name, phone, email contact, a little bit of information. On the front of that, we have something called Life Act QPR. We've done this already with school parents. We've done it with our mental health ministry. So QPR specifically stands for question, persuade, refer. What this is referring to on the mental health side is, how do you know what to do when you're connecting with a young person and they may be depressed or deeply distressed? How do you know how serious that is? And in that 1 hour training, and specifically the date, it's on the front of the orange thing as well, you can put it down, October 23rd, only 11 days from now, 1 hour. And what that training is for, I know I've participated in this myself, is if any of us, and it's not just a young adult, but if we encounter that person who may be considering ending their lives, what do you do? And you'll leave that 1 hour training knowing what to do in very concrete ways. And you can already tell what the theme of that is, and it is the QPR, just like CPR saves lives. QPR saves mental health lives, and it would be question, persuade, and refer is what that stands for. So the QPR piece is a thing coming up. Also on here, we have been doing, and many of you patiently have heard us talk about NAMI and our mental health ministry recently did for the second year, the NAMI walk. Here's your update. Our goal was to raise $2,500. We raised $4,000, and we had 100 walkers. We were the only Catholic church doing that. So another shout out to St. Ambrose, to our team. I know often I end up being the upfront person because nobody else will do it. But I don't want you to think for a moment that I'm doing all the work, because that would be inaccurate. We have a wonderful team here. Our team, just stand up. I know you're not all here. Stand up, mental health ministry team. Can we recognize them and give them a hand, please? So, thank you. Turn in that orange page, because what we'll do is send you things. You don't have to do them, but we want to resource people. You know, you have a blue letter. Take this when you leave tonight. John was very good and clear in saying the research itself is not prescriptive regarding how to respond. It doesn't give us the resources. That's not what the research is. However, we do need that, amen? So what we have, like literally this page has a whole bunch of websites you need. As an example, we have a whole set of videos on mental health stuff right on our own website, the National Institute of Mental Health. Anybody here who's parenting teens, we have a great handout, 7 things to know about the teen brain. These are like practical things you can grab onto and go, oh, that's why they're acting like that. Like really practical things that we want to be supportive. And I'm going to turn it over to Father Bob to wrap up, but I just want to say this. We have to talk about this in our families, in our parish communities, in our school. You know, through Lisa's invitation, I was invited recently to speak on mental health to the Brunswick Rotary Club. There were about 20, 25 people. It was 7 in the morning. I didn't count. But very interesting. I shared a little bit and talked about, as an example, schizophrenia. We had a son who died at age 23 from that illness. 25 people. 3 of them came up in the after talk. All had a direct family member, a cousin, a brother, an aunt, an uncle, who died from that, out of 25. And one of them, it just really struck me. He said, even in his death, we said he died from blood pressure, high blood pressure, and other related causes, because we couldn't say that he had a mental illness. Fast forward a couple years ago, and some of you may have been at Mass, but among my many gratitudes for our pastor is I said, you know, I'm in my mid-60s. Ask yourself this. How many of you have heard a homily any time in your life on mental health or mental illness? 1.